Welcome to Beyond Imagination, the future of creative technology, presented by Technicolor Creative Studios. I'm your host, Isabelle du Plessis, Global PR Director across The Mill, MPC, Mikros Animation, and Technicolor Games. In this special edition podcast season, we'll be talking to leading figures across the creative technology space about evolving trends that are shaping the future of filmmaking, gaming, advertising, animation, innovation, and talent. Today, I'm chatting with Simon Devereux, founder of Access VFX, a global nonprofit focused on actively pursuing inclusion, diversity, awareness, and opportunity within the VFX industry. Simon, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast.
You're very welcome. Nicely put.
Simon, you and I worked together at The Mill a few years back when you were the global head of learning and development there, and you've had an incredibly interesting career focused on facilitating growth of talent in varying industries. Firstly, tell me a bit about how you got into the line of work you're in now.
Well, it's a long story in that I started as a freelance illustrator. Now, I'm not going to give you the full story because that'll probably take up the whole podcast. So, 1997, came to London, freelance illustrated, got a few decent commissions out of it, and had a part-time job at a famous retailer, which I won't name, more because there are other retailers available, in South London, essentially just to pay the rent. But it was in the HR team or the personnel team then, and I was a training coordinator. So you're very young Simon Devereux, a 3-day-a-week training coordinator at a supermarket. And I ended up realizing that the 90s wasn't a very easy environment to make money as a freelancer. There was no internet, there's no mobile phones, there's no social media, it was just hustle. So I ended up taking on the role full time, which then, and people can check out my LinkedIn profile, is pretty much the character arc through the various companies that I've worked in. And I guess the moment where I started to specialize in talent development and people was my time at Channel 4. So I joined as a HR business partner, and it was Joe Taylor, who was the head of 4 Talent at the time, who involved me in a lot of what was called inspiration days with 4 Talent. So we'd go out and we'd meet with mostly young people at various cities all across the country, just telling them about careers in telly. And I saw potential in me as a HR business partner, and I ended up taking a 2-week secondment because I just enjoyed spending time with that team and designing programs and working on apprenticeships and internships and just entry-level talent, which was really rewarding. And that 2-week placement or secondment became a permanent offer, which then led to me joining The Mill, then led to me joining PlayStation, and now where I am at Framestore currently.
You know, that reminds me a little bit of my career path in that I started on a 2-week placement too. And it also, I started on 2-week placement at The Mill on my gap year previous to attending university, and then it turned into a full-time job offer. And then I actually cancelled my place at university and decided to just get cracking with working in the industry. So we're chatting to you today because of your notable work with Access VFX. Tell me a bit more about the organisation and how it came about.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, it was a real accident, really. I mean, the plan with Access VFX was to put on an event during Inclusion Week UK 2017, but it all started at The Mill back in 2016 when we started having conversations around inclusion and diversity as a studio. And it was a conversation that was driven by our MD at the time at The Mill, Darren O'Kelly, and Tori Wire, the HR director, and Claire Anderson, actually our head of talent at the time. And we were talking about what we need to do in terms of increasing representation at the studio, because we were in the heart of Soho. We were in an incredibly diverse part of London. And internally, you would look around and you saw people who looked like you. And I think you'd probably work out what that looked like. But the demographic was very male, very white, very middle class. And we wanted to do something about it. So we had a number of conversations. Darren introduced me to a lady called Roxanne Hobbs, who runs a company called the Hobbs Consultancy. So very much kind of deeply rooted in diversity and inclusion. And she ran some great focus groups with employees, which led to us forming the Mill's first inclusion network, and focus groups with senior management. And I remember one of those focus groups, I remember presenting and I was talking about what I used to do at Channel 4. We used to do loads of stuff during Diversity Week, as it was called at the time. I thought, let's do Inclusion Week. And Darren just said, yeah, do it. And I was like, okay. And it was like 2 months away. And I was like, right, we're going to have to kind of like really mount up here and create something amazing. So we went to work and we had a great week. And I'm sure you remember it, Izzy. We had so much going on that week from... we had an amazing panel. I mean, the sad news a few weeks ago about Jamal Edwards passing away. Jamal was on our first panel at the Mill talking about how we built SBTV. We had Emma Sexton chair it. We had Louise Hussey from Animated Women UK and Reese Ewing from the Mill just talking about really cool kind of stuff and different perspectives. We had Peter Tatchell come in and talk about the battle for LGBTQI plus rights. It was amazing. And the feedback we got from all levels of employee and staff was, we've never had this conversation before. This is amazing. You'd have these incredible conversations by the lift. I remember having a conversation. My son had just been born at the time, and we had this whole conversation around gender identity. Someone just asked me about, how, my son would identify. It was just amazing, right? Really creative, open-minded conversations. Anyway, long story short, we had that event and we started planning the next one, as you do, right? You run one great week and you're on to the next one. So we were planning Inclusion Week 2017. And I used to go in my capacity as a member of the HR team. I used to go to the UK Screen Alliance monthly meeting, the kind of skills meeting. And we used to have all kinds of conversations around inclusion and diversity. At the time, it would have been around April 2017. There had been a survey done via the industry, and we were going through the results, and it was the usual results, not enough gender representation in senior roles, in creative roles, and it got onto the slide around ethnicity and race, and you can imagine what that bar chart looked like. And we started talking about the work we were doing at the Mill, and Claire Anderson was there, who I mentioned earlier, our head of talent, and she said, we're doing this great stuff at the Mill. We'd just done International Women's Day as well at the time, and Neil Hatton, the CEO of the UK Screen Alliance, which is the trade body for the on-screen industry, just said, why don't you present what you've done at the Mill at the next meeting? So that's what I did. I whipped up a deck, we turned up, and I was presenting everything we did at the Mill, Inclusion Week, International Women's Day, and that we were planning Inclusion Week 2017. And then I stopped, and this is the kind of goosebumps moment I get every time I tell it, is I looked around the room and you had DNEG over there, you had ILM, Framestore, Blueser Animation, all these big studios. And I said, look, we work together on so many externally facing programs, right? Like entry-level programs, apprenticeships. We should do this as industry this year. And I looked around the room, got a bit of informal sign-up, put a meeting in, and I think there was about 9 studios involved at the time. We all met at the Mill for a coffee to work it all out. And then we agreed to work on this event, but we agreed at the time that we would do our own timetables in each studio. And that just seemed bizarre because that's so much work, right? 9-10 studios, one massive timetable per studio, crazy. So we thought, let's do what the industry did years ago with Soho Create. There was this great creative festival around Soho. And we thought, wouldn't it be amazing if you could put the word out to industry and say, look, you can come to the Mill on the Monday morning and hear a great talk around intersectionality. Then you can go over to the South Bank and hear this great conversation. Then you can go over to MPC and sit in their cinema and hear a great talk. And then there'd be an evening event because the Mill didn't have a screening room, right? But all of our competitors had these cinemas. So you could go and see a screening. And it was amazing. And leading up to that event, we agreed that because we work so well as a network, we should call ourselves something because it felt wrong to deliver the event, which was the plan originally, and then just walk away from it because diversity just doesn't begin and end with an event, right? Exactly. So we just kept it going. And it was Amy Smith at Framestore at the time. She won the competition on naming the group. There's a number of different options and I can't remember what we came up with. But Access VFX stuck because we like the colon. We like Access animation, Access film, Access post-production. But Access VFX is just stuck as a kind of a one-stop shop for the animation, visual effects and games industry, really. So that's the not so short story, but it's a great one. And we just kept going ever since. It was all right. As soon as we delivered that week, it's all right, what's next? And the rest is history.
One of the things I really love about the Access VFX network is that it is a network, and you have been challenged with the difficulty of bringing historic competitors together to combat an issue that affects the entire industry and create an industry standard as opposed to one company standard, which I think is incredibly important. How has it been bringing those companies together who have historically been competitors?
Yeah, it was easy, really easy. I kind of want to say that it was a really challenging process. I mean, I have to kind of like bat studios away with a big stick at a lot of the time because there's so much interest in joining the membership. And I think it comes from that community that I think only really exists in our industry. I've worked in lots of other industries. And when I worked in TV, for example, I mean, the BBC and Channel 4 kind of collaborated a lot, but we were public service broadcasters at the time. So we had that diversity heartbeat running through our veins, whether it be the license fee and what the BBC stand for, or what Channel 4 clearly stand for and still stand for to this day. Whereas within visual effects, there is just this shared idea of community. And I think the nature of visual effects work is, particularly on the artist side and production, is there's so much movement, right? There's so much movement around, and people kind of accept it, that people will move. I remember at the Mill when ILM opened up down the road and started working on The Force Awakens. I remember losing some really key artists, but there was a real acceptance about that, hey, why would you begrudge somebody who wants to go off and work on a Star Wars movie? It's like an ambition for a young kid. So there's just that sense of community. All of the kind of projects that we work on, all of the shared projects we have with education, is we're always sitting around a table at some point with our peers from industry. And that's why it worked, I think, is that, when we all sat around that table planning Access VFX, because mostly we were either MDs, HR folk, talent folk, there were no artists or producers. We're not involved in the bidding process. We're not kind of, even though the companies are bidding on the same jobs and commercials and shows, actually for the people sitting around the table, yes, we represent those studios, but the reality is our shared goal is increasing the diversity of the industry, and that's what brought people together, is that anchor that and everybody's got on really well, but we're kind of just human beings who like spending time with each other.
That's great. Why do you think the VFX industry specifically has been so challenged with levels of diversity in the past?
So I've got an opinion about this, and disclaimer is this might not be right, because it's basically born out of just conversations I've had over the years. And I think it's down to unconscious bias. And I know unconscious bias gets bandied around a lot around all industries. Whenever whenever anybody asks for diversity training, it's like, well, let's run an unconscious bias workshop. And actually, it's bigger than that. But what I've found is that a lot of studios are typically founded by geeky white men. Is that fair to say? Right?
I think that's probably fair to say.
And nothing against the people we know, but it's people who love films and explosions and cool stuff, right? And it's quite geeky. And I'm a self-confessed geek, so I'm in good company. And I think what typically happens is unconscious bias is unconscious, so you don't know you're making the decisions. And unconscious bias shows up when you're recruiting. And I think culturally, when you're hiring in your own image. And I think when you're growing those studios, you gravitate to the familiar. And I think it's partly down to bias. It's partly down to cultural norms of, who can I go for a pint with? Who can I hang out with in Soho? Who's like me? And if you walk around Soho, probably even now, you see a lot of people who look very similar. And I think there's something in that. It might sound a little bit controversial, but I just think there's, we hire people we like to spend time with. And typically, me included, that unconscious bias leads to, building those teams around you.
Mm-hmm. I also wonder how high the barrier of entry seems for the visual effects industry, because it's so niche in the technologies that we use, and I'm not sure how many people know that industry is available to them, that their work as an artist can turn into quite a lucrative job. And I've spoken to a lot of people. Countless people have told me, I didn't even know I could do this for a living, until someone came into my peripheral who was doing it, and suddenly an idea is born. But it's not the kind of career that you really talk about in school.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there, and I completely agree with you. I think Access VFX has always been about creating those moments when you knew what you wanted to do. And I hope there's all these great stories 20, 30 years down the pipe where people say, I'm a creative director because I went to an Access VFX event. I think going back to your original point, I think it's also down to, and it goes back to barrier to entry. I remember my early days at the Mill and TV is people only really took on graduates, particularly on the artist side. A bit different with production, I think. I think production was always about bringing in these great personalities and organisers of people. But typically your biggest population of employee in a studio is going to be your talent, your artists. And a lot of those artists would have come through the university route. So all the big kind of the Hertfordshire universities, the Bournemouth universities. And typically the folks that go to universities can afford to go to universities, which means you miss out on that socioeconomic diversity. You miss out on, there is a racial component to that as well. And I think my experience of university, I was at the university back in the 90s, so it's probably not the best comparison, but it was all people like me. It was all white people. There was one black guy on the entire degree, and he left after a couple of months. So I think there's something in that too. But there's also a knowledge piece as well. I think it's all about the circles you run into, your point, Izzy. And I don't think enough people know that this exists as a viable career route. Mm-hmm. It's a hidden career, unfortunately, still.
Access VFX spans the UK and the US too. Now you've got chapters on both coasts. Have you seen any notable differences in the cultures of both countries when it comes into breaking into the world of VFX or even jobs as a whole? I was born in the UK and worked there for a number of years, and I now live in the US. And the reaction from people when they hear I didn't go to university is always a lot stronger in the US than in the UK.
I think that's a really good point. And I think your story is brilliant as well, Izzy. I love that you've got to the dizzy heights of your career now, having been through that journey, if that's fair for me to say. I think it's a great example. And I'm glad I'm having this conversation with you, actually, Izzy. I think the difference is, I think the apprenticeship route is the big difference. Because I think there's available opportunity. But I think in the UK, particularly when the apprenticeship levy came into place, so when big companies were taxed, a levy that fed into a digital pot to be able to invest in apprenticeships, I've seen young people and older people with no experience come in with next to a little bit of Nuke or a little bit of After Effects knowledge that they've learned on YouTube. And I know tons of them are moving around industry now as credible artists, and they came in. It's the earn as you learn mentality. So you do your 18-month apprenticeship at college, you learn your craft, and typically when I was involved in the VFX apprenticeships, it was either you came in as a 2D artist or 2D assist or a assistant technical director in the 3D department. And then you worked with great mentors, you worked with a great educational provider, and you got on the box really quickly. And there was a whole argument at the time whether you either came in through the running route, which has its merits, absolutely, but it was a much longer journey to get to what you wanted to do than the apprenticeship route, where you were right there. There was that structure there. You knew what you were learning. And I've seen kids as young as 16 just absolutely skyrocket their career by getting in via the apprenticeship level, the apprenticeship route, and bypassing the university route and being just raw talent that came in, that you don't have to necessarily go down that path. So I think that's one of the things that I'd point out. I don't think apprenticeships exist as a route in the US. I think it's mainly internships, isn't it? I believe. I might be wrong in that, but...
Yeah, I think culturally there's definitely a stigma in the US around not attending university, and then you do alienate a huge portion of the population who are just raw, untapped talent. And there are some really incredible organizations that help people integrate into this industry. D&AD Shift is one of them. That's a really brilliant mentoring scheme for people who haven't been able to go to university to integrate into the advertising industry and start learning about facets of the industry. I would love to see our industry really embrace the concept of apprenticeships, because that is a really wonderful way to teach people the tricks of your trade. And if you have that raw talent who has great storytelling ability and that hunger and eagerness to learn, a lot of what we do really can be learnt on the job and from industry experts who surround you.
Yeah, I mean, that mentoring is at the heartbeat of visual effects and games and animation. I mean, I always try to catch all three at the same time. It really is. I mean, every apprenticeship we had at the mill back in the day, the appetite for mentoring, like you would get a mentor for every show, every avenue. I was involved from a kind of more holistic kind of helicopter mentor. They had mentors it was seriously the journey these folks went on through the apprenticeship was nothing short of astounding. Like, I was so jealous that it existed. And to your point, like, all the tech stuff you can learn, and it's changing all the time anyway. I mean, look at what's happening with the Unreal Engine revolution, right? It's just, there'll be another new shiny thing that artists will have to learn in another 5-6 years' time. But the fundamentals will remain, because we haven't quite got onto the behavioural communication skills that are as important as the craft-based skills. You know, whether you work in marketing, or you work in talent, or you work in production, or 2D, 3D, VR, wherever. It's all about connecting, because we often forget that we're in the people business. Yeah, we're in the content creation business. Of course we are. It's all about beautiful stuff. But we're in the people business. It's directors and the clients and the relationships and the teams working on the shows. And you have to play nice. You've got to work well with others. And they don't teach that at college, right? But they do teach it through the apprenticeship as well. And it's trying to kind of get that happy marriage of both happening at that younger age, not just learning all the craft. Because if you can't take feedback or know when your idea isn't the best one in the room, then you can't work in this industry. So there's a lot in there, isn't there, Izzy? Sorry, I've just thrown a lot. There's a lot to unpack, but it's,
no, I honestly owe my career to the wonderful mentors I've been surrounded by, who really helped me learn my craft on the job. And I remember a mentorship scheme I was part of when you were at the mill, where one of my mentors wasn't actually in my department, which was really interesting because it facilitated a conversation with someone who could give me such different insight and aspect into the business and the business of people, like you say. And I think that almost cross-training is so valuable.
Totally. I think I remember that program, and we had lots of different layers to it, didn't we? I think you were involved in the management layer of it, I think. And we always made a point of connecting anybody who signed up to, even whether it was a management mentor or a career development mentor, is you still got that insight, but it was from a different part of the business. So you'd be connected to somebody in LA or Chicago or New York. So not only did you get a different perspective from another human being, but you also got that whole geographic context, and it created a brand new relationship that otherwise wouldn't have happened as well. But I think there's definitely so much power in that. And from whatever your craft is, understanding somebody else's world is so powerful. I mean, if you bring it down to the work, I mean, we connected producers and artists together, and on a typical job, it would be just about the job and the shots and the work. But actually, if you take that into a mentoring kind of prism, then you understand that producer isn't just working on your show. They're working on loads of different shows, and so are you. And you get to go, wow, I didn't know that. This is awesome. And you're having this really rich, natural conversation where you just appreciate each other's worlds a bit more, rather than just like going, I need this by X, and then people fall out and there's a bit of toxicity going on. Whereas if you just have these meaningful conversations with no agenda, you can just go for coffee and talk about what you saw on Netflix the other night. It doesn't matter, but you're just getting this really nice dialogue going. Does that make sense? I'm so glad that you were involved in it, and it's something I'm a massive believer in. It's all about different perspectives. That's what diversity and inclusion is about, right? It's about just going, hey, there's a new idea.
And different perspectives are so important at every level of your career. I remember one specific story you were actually telling me the other day, Simon, about Pat Joseph, one of the original founders of the mill, always wanting to be paired with an entry-level position, a runner, because he learnt so much from their perspective. And we're talking about someone who's been in the industry for over 30, 40 years, who founded a company, but still saw the value and insight from someone coming up through the ranks. And I think that's so important, that idea of 360 mentorship. Yes. It's not just about older people or more seasoned people mentoring entry-level people, as it were.
Exactly. I'm a firm believer that your mentor doesn't have to be older than you. It's such a misconception and stereotype, isn't it? That it's some kind of like Gandalf figure that kind of takes you under their wing and teaches you the do's and don'ts of the world. And it was so important with that particular program that everybody had access to be a mentor, whether you were, a runner. Like in the example with Pat, for example, he, like you say, he was insistent on only mentoring runners. He didn't want to mentor anyone else, even if they asked. He just wanted to mentor runners, and he got so much from that because he got that perspective from the next generation coming into his studio and getting their take, and he learned from that. And they got to, as you say, spend time with one of the founders. Amazing. And it's just nuts. It's so good. It's amazing. I could bang on about it all day.
Touching on age, I also want to explore the concept of not just facilitating the growth of young talent, but also providing cross-training and career opportunities for those who might be looking to change careers entirely. I've seen runners come into the business 10 years into a career in finance and say, I've just always wanted to be a colorist, and I'm willing to start from the bottom and give it a try. And said colorist is now an award-winning colorist. So those stories are always really inspiring too.
Yeah, I love that. And it's something I always have to catch myself whenever I'm doing any kind of Access VFX talks is you always typically default to talk about young people. And then I always catch myself and go, and I'll say, and old people, which just sounds weird. but and people who aren't young, because people change careers all the time, and they have the right to do that. It's a challenge because we tend to go for entry-level talent a lot of the time. So we tend to think in that kind of zone that we only need to bring in late teens, early 20s. And actually, there's great organisations like Film London, for example. I did a talk for them years ago when I was at the mill, and it was a network of returning mothers coming back into industry once they'd raised their families, and they couldn't get work. They couldn't, and they were industry legends, a lot of these folk. They'd been in industry a long time. The stories they had to tell, but they were kind of invisible because, they'd almost fallen off a bit of a cliff, once they started their families, and they couldn't get their break again, which is insane to think about that, because you had these insanely talented, seasoned professionals who couldn't get a foot in the door. And thank God Film London exists and other such companies that promote that. But from a Access VFX point of view, absolutely, we don't just stand for young talent. It's just about talent, and whatever level you're at, as long as you're willing to come in and relearn and can afford to do so, then the door's open. Absolutely. And there's lots of examples around industry where we've taken on older people, to coin a phrase. I don't know what the official term is, but I'm old, so I'm okay. I can pretty much say what I want. But I think, it's the door's open. It's something I firmly believe in. That the programs are open. The apprenticeship program is open to anybody who wants to apply, and we're really clear on that. And we have had older people in their kind of 30s who have joined the apprenticeship program and flourished.
For budding artists, producers, I hate to say just artists and producers because there are so many roles within the VFX industry: marketing, law, HR, talent. For those that are interested in getting into our industry that are listening, where should they start? What would your advice be? There's a lot in there. I think the obvious one I will plug, and I know we'll probably talk about it later, is get involved with the Access VFX mentoring program, because it's growing exponentially every day. You mentioned the global chapters that we're lucky enough to have opened. We have the program is alive and well in Australia and New Zealand, all over America,
in the US, in Canada, and all over the UK. We're looking at Europe at the moment to kind of get a new chapter kind of signed up, because there's a lot of activity happening in Europe, as you know, and it's free to join. So if anybody wants to get involved, or whatever discipline or whatever they want to do, they can sign up to that mentoring program. That would be the first call to action, and that can be accessed at www.accessvfx.org/mentors. I know that because I do a lot of podcasts and I always finish with that, so it rolls off the tongue. So there's that. And then whenever I'm kind of involved in panels, I always hear, and I'll shout out St. John Walker, who runs the education side of things at Escape Studios. And he always says, whatever you want to do, just kind of make something. You know, if you want to be a matte painter, do some painting. If you want to be a director, make a film. If you want, it's like just create content. That's on the artistic side. For everyone else who isn't an artist, it's about really connecting with that community I talked about earlier. There is an absolute network of great talent managers and recruiters all over LinkedIn. Look at any of our old 2020 video podcasts that exist on our YouTube channel, where we have the celebrity squares of the talent industry within VFX. Get those names, connect with them on LinkedIn, have dialogue, don't overdo it, but just connect, ask questions, go to events, digital or in person, and you become kind of that face. Because I'm sure you've seen it, Izzy, like whenever we go to these events, these networking events, these industry events, you often start to see the same people, because they're proactive and they turn up and they seek you out, and they'll spend 5 minutes with you, but they're on your agenda. And I can name a bunch of people that I count as part of that network, who I know have got jobs now because they've engaged with what we've not just Access VFX events. I mean, in the UK, we've got companies like Screen Skills who run events all the time, and I mentioned Film London, and so much. So I think networking is massive, but finding kind of more, I guess, Gen Z ways to network. So it's not like the old days of just going to an event and collecting a load of business cards, but it is about connecting with the right digital platforms, speaking to the right people. I always say, don't just focus on the recruiters, focus on some of your near peers. So find out, if you might watch a commercial and find out who was the director, or who was the 2D artist on there, who's the PA on there, who's somebody who is at your level, who you can go, hey, I just saw your work, it was awesome. How did you get into the industry? If you're an artist, if you go and watch a movie and watch the credits and go and just find a few names and connect with people. So I think there's something in there around being proactive with your networking as well. But first and foremost is get yourself a mentor, because it's free and you can get connected to somebody from industry, from any studio, from any part of the world. And it's all online. And if you're as young as 13 to 99 and beyond, people live older than 99, then sign up and get connected to somebody who can help you,
So mentoring is something you offer through Access VFX, which is brilliant. Talk me through some of the other action points and initiatives that you and the Access VFX team are working on to help companies diversify their workforce and help budding talent break into the industry.
That's a great question. So there's the kind of the core Access VFX network, and then from that we have two kind of what I always kind of unfairly call splinter cells, but they're essentially we have QVFX, which stands for Queer VFX, and that's our LGBTQI plus community, and we launched Q during Pride Month 2019. 2020 was pandemic, right, when that kicked off, wasn't it? So we ran monthly events after that, created an amazing community. We were scuppered by the pandemic, and we're reskinning and relaunching this year that QVFX network. So that's one way to connect with a new perspective and a new group, not a new group of people, but a group of people who are trying to get into industry. And there's a massive community trying to get in there. So that's alive and well in the UK and in Montreal. And then off the back of the events of 2020, crikey, I'm losing. It's all like just one blurry year, isn't it? 2020, the year where George Floyd unfortunately lost his life, and Black Lives Matter came to the fore once more is we diversified our board and we created Access VFX, which is our race equity movement led by Jin Godden and Anna Kande and Nene Sotam from We Are Stripes. So both Anne and Jin are exec producers in industry doing amazing work, and people of colour, and Nene's been a big part of the We Are Stripes movement and obviously our early Industry Connect events. And we ran our first in-person community event in October last year. And we have the Visibility Project, which amplifies the voices and the profiles of people of colour working in our industry globally, and that's ongoing. And what we're doing at the moment is I'm kind of calling it getting the band back together. So I've been tidying up the Access VFX membership for we're going to sort the website out again. We're going to create an all singing, all dancing jobs page. So if you want to work in the visual effects industry, go to the Access VFX website and we have it sorted, and you'll have links to every studio's job page. So you don't have to kind of go all over the place. It's right there. And we're going to run a big We're Back event where we're going to get back in the saddle with QVFX, get Access VFX back on people's radar, and really start running our own events again. Because we used to turn up to other people's events and pay a lot of money to do it. And I think we can actually stand on our own 2 feet now and start to get out into communities rather than running events in our studios, because socioeconomic diversity is a big one for us. We did an event a few years ago. We went into Brixton Town Hall with UK Black Tech, and we ran an amazing event in Brixton, and we met all these young kids who just made games on their phones using free apps, and they had no idea what to do with them. They just did it for fun. They're making games for fun. It's again going back to raw talent. And there's something about going into communities and setting up stall and speaking to people. Again, going back to your point earlier, Izzy, around unearthing the hidden career that is visual effects and creating those light bulb moments for people. So I think there'll be a lot of work we'll do where we won't just do events in big cities, in big shiny studios. We'll get out into different parts of the country and the world and keep flying the flag. And of course, the big thing is trying to get a bit of presence in Europe and tap into the talent market out there as well.
Yeah. You have done so much since your inception in 2016, 2017, to really bring the conversation of diversity, inclusion, and accessibility to the forefront of the conversation within VFX. If you'd like to see all major VFX studios and production studios really adopt one policy or line of action in the next year, what would it be?
It's a good question. I mean, the first one, the selfish one, is everybody should be a member of Access VFX. I think that should be, if it's going to be a global community, there needs to be a true global community. So we're working on that. It's a good one. I mean, I always think, we've talked a lot about, I think programs and more entry-level opportunities is obvious. So I think we've talked about that a bit already. I think every studio should have entry-level programs that stand for diversity and different perspectives, and don't just do your recruitment on LinkedIn, because not everybody has a LinkedIn account. There's a load of interesting stuff happening with TikTok at the moment in recruitment. Your Gen Z audience aren't all on LinkedIn. So I think creatively about where you recruit. Practically, and I don't know how feasible this is, and I'm going to credit Jin Godden, who was on our first episode of our second season of the Access VFX podcast. She talked about making space on set for talent. And again, this not just young people, anybody who wants to get into industry, not just doing work experience where you're following somebody around a studio, but going on set and seeing what goes down on set and what it's like to be a producer in the eye of the storm, what it's like to be a visual effects supervisor in the eye of the storm, what it's like to be at any level of DOP, whoever you are. It's a lot of activity goes on those sets, and I think, get those NDAs signed and create space for diverse talent to get on set and really experience what it's like, and to instill that excitement as well. I think there's practical steps we can do there, because there's always that kind of fear of letting people behind the curtain. I was at the mill for 7 years. I never got to see what it's like on set. I never got to kind of, you heard stories, and we ran events, and we did some great training initiative that talked to it. But all the tech stuff is available anywhere, right? YouTube, wherever. But what goes down on a commercial shoot, on a film shoot, TV, episodic, whatever, VR, that's where I think that we could add some real value and excitement, because that's where the magic happens, right? So that would be my tip, I think. It's a bit aspirational, but it's doable.
Aspirational but doable.
There you go.
Well,
get that on
Simon,
a t-shirt.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Before we go, where can people find Access VFX online, and where can they follow you on social?
Social, so we're at Access VFX everywhere on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm toying with TikTok, but I'm too old. We're looking to bring some young people on our board to help us with that. So coming soon. But yeah, I would go LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Our website is just www.accessvfx.org. Stick a /mentors at the end of that, and you can find out how to get involved with our mentor program and get involved that way. Or you can contact us via the website as well if you're interested in becoming a member. So I think that would be the shameless plug at the end.
Thank you.
Thank you, Izzy. Pleasure.
If you're interested in exploring any of the ideas you heard today, please get in touch with the Technicolor Creative Studios team via any one of our studio websites or email beyondimagination@technicolor.com. Today's podcast was produced by Lime Studios, led by executive producer Becca Falborn. You can follow Lime Studios on all platforms at limestudios.tv. Thank you to all of our guests and to you for tuning in to Beyond Imagination.